This is Dr. Panda.
How did the legend of vampires come to be? And how has it evolved throughout history? Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Red Panda, and today we're going to dive into the mysterious world of vampires. Before the 19th century, vampires were mere rural folktales, more akin to mutated creatures like zombies. They were hideous, with low intelligence, driven solely by an instinct to feed on blood, utterly incapable of thought. As lowly monsters, they could only sleep in coffins during the day and would perish the moment sunlight touched them, completely outdated. Yet today's vampires are either handsome men or beautiful women, exuding elegance and charm. They reside in grand castles, enjoy wearing tuxedos, sipping red wine, and throwing extravagant parties, and they no longer fear the sun. So, what sparked this transformation? The earliest vampires were grotesque and originated in regions like Romania and Hungary, on the fringes of Eastern Europe. As obscure creatures, they had little popularity and were largely ignored. But modern vampires are strikingly attractive, global icons known to all, frequently gracing movies, anime, and TV shows. Take Twilight, for example. Its stunning cast is undeniably captivating. What exactly did vampires experience along the way, transforming from a rural Eastern European folktale into a phenomenon that conquered the world? The origin of modern vampires. Looking across the globe, vampire legends are astonishingly varied. Though all are tied to blood, death, and fear, the names and depictions of these blood-sucking beings differ greatly by region. For instance, in Brazil, people speak of a creature called the chupacabra, a vampiric entity said to lure men into the depths of the forest to drain their blood. In Africa, tales circulate of the sambisam, vampiric beings who disguise themselves as beautiful women, blending into crowds to strike when the moment is right. While these stories vary, they all reflect how different cultures imagine and fear blood-feeding monsters in their own unique ways. The prototype of the modern vampire, one of over 300 such monsters, originated in Eastern Europe and the Balkan Peninsula. The reason such legends emerged in this region is that the Balkans sit at the crossroads of Eurasia, serving as a transportation hub between Asia, Europe, and Africa, caught between powers like the Ottoman Empire, Russia, and Austria. Today, this area is marked by complex ethnic and religious diversity, often described as a land of perpetual conflict. Historically, it has been Europe's powder keg, a region plagued by frequent wars that led to outbreaks of plague or pestilence, fostering panic and collective delusions. Unable to explain the causes of disease and death, people attributed these phenomena to vampires. More specifically, because the Black Death was contagious, people often buried victims who were not yet fully dead in a rush to contain the spread. Some of these individuals, still alive, would struggle desperately inside their coffins, only succumbing days after burial, a grim reality known as being buried alive. It's believed that when people later noticed irregularities at grave sites, they found scratch marks and bloodstains inside coffins, or even corpses that had shifted positions, creating the illusion that the dead had revived and gone off to suck blood. This tied into rumors that vampires would rise from their graves at midnight, roaming the streets and feeding on blood. The association likely stemmed from the Black Death's tendency to worsen at night, with many falling suddenly ill, showing symptoms like high fever and coughing, only to die by morning. People began to imagine this as a disease spread by vampires. As the Black Death struck Eastern Europe repeatedly, rumors flourished in an atmosphere of extreme fear. For instance, a patient who died suddenly at night might, through word of mouth, end up being described as bitten by a vampire. In Eastern Europe, particularly among the Slavic people, there was a widespread belief that those who died unnatural deaths would return as vengeful spirits to harm the living and drink their blood. This provided a theoretical foundation for the vampire legend. Fearful of the dead becoming vampires, Eastern European funeral practices often included placing garlic in the deceased's mouth, driving a stake through their heart, or even decapitating the body. These customs reflect the Slavic people's fear of death and disease, and they became classic methods for destroying vampires in later lore. But why didn't Western Europe, which also experienced frequent wars and plagues, have similar vampire legends? This is because Western Europe adhered to Christianity, where believers held that after death, one either went to heaven or hell, making resurrection as a vampire impossible. Any theory of the dead returning to life would be considered heresy by the Church and punishable by death. The Slavic people, on the other hand, were influenced by the Orthodox Church and maintained their own traditional beliefs. Additionally, since most of the population consisted of illiterate peasants, superstitious tales were very popular. When Orthodox Christianity was introduced, it didn't suppress these traditional beliefs but gradually integrated with them, allowing the vampire culture to persist. By the early 18th century, the Ottoman Empire, which had long controlled Eastern Europe, began to decline. Austria seized the opportunity to launch a major offensive, reclaiming control over territories like Hungary and Serbia. The Slavic vampire legends began to be documented by Austrian officials and brought back to Western Europe. In 1725, while stationed in Serbia, the Austrian military reported a mass death event. 9 people died in a village within just 8 days. Initially, officials suspected a plague, but the villagers claimed it was the work of a farmer named Peter, who had become a vampire after his death and was attacking them. The military found this absurd, but at the villagers' insistence, they exhumed Peter's body. They discovered that it hadn't decomposed, and his lips and nails were covered in fresh blood. This caused widespread panic, and the villagers used traditional methods to drive a stake through Peter's heart and burn his body. Several other vampire reports followed, all of which were recorded in official documents. This gave rise to a new term, vampire, derived from Slavic languages, meaning blood-sucking shadow. It was used specifically to describe undead creatures whose bodies didn't decay after death and who attacked the living. This word later evolved into the English term vampire. At the time, the widespread adoption of the printing press allowed reports, magazines, and pamphlets about vampires, backed by official records, to spread from Eastern Europe to Western nations like Germany and France. Unlike the countless vampire rumors that had circulated before, this marked the first time such tales were supported by detailed official documentation, transforming vampires from mere folklore into a sensation across Europe. Panic gripped the continent, with people everywhere digging up graves, driving stakes through corpses, stuffing them with garlic, or even beheading them to prevent the dead from rising as vampires. Graveyards became eerie scenes, dotted with tall wooden stakes impaling exhumed bodies, a terrifying sight. The hysteria fueled by vampire legends spiraled out of control, leading to extreme acts like grave robbing and corpse burning. By the 18th century, Europe's major plague outbreaks had subsided, and the Enlightenment was ushering in an era of science and reason. Medical experts, dispatched by authorities to investigate, concluded that the so-called vampires were simply the result of natural decomposition processes. Bloating, blood seeping from the mouth and nose, changes in skin color, and the apparent lengthening of hair and nails. The Pope also stepped in, declaring that, from a theological standpoint, vampires didn't exist. Through this rare collaboration between science and religion, the vampire frenzy of the 18th century was finally quelled, though not without difficulty. Up to that point, vampires remained rural folktales of the plains, slow, clumsy, mindless low-tier monsters, more akin to zombies in their overall depiction. The aristocratic vampire. After 1941, vampires underwent a process of aristocratization. Their appearance transformed into something handsome and elegant, imbued with a romantic and passionate flair, marking a complete 360-degree shift in their image. Several key factors contributed to this change. In the later stages of the Enlightenment, many grew dissatisfied with the rigid emphasis on logic and rationalism. This discontent gave rise to a group of humanists who valued emotion and the warmth of humanity. They harbored a deep fascination with the mysteries of the Middle Ages, and by the late 18th century, this sparked the emergence of Gothic horror novels. Blending terror, mystery, and romanticism, these works were known for their eerie, foreboding atmospheres and intricate, twist-filled plots, often set in the quintessential Gothic castle. The medieval vampire legends became a perfect vehicle for these writers to express their sentiments and explore the depths of human nature. This evolution was also tied to three historical figures whose cruelty, bloodshed, and violence inspired vampire culture. The first was Elizabeth Bathory, a 16th-century Hungarian countess born into a prestigious and immensely wealthy family. Fluent in multiple languages and knowledgeable in science and astronomy, she was celebrated as Hungary's foremost beauty. However, as she aged, she grew increasingly obsessed with her fading looks, eventually believing that the blood of young girls could preserve her youth. She is said to have killed at least 80 people. Some accounts even suggest as many as 650. Despite her supreme power and privilege, the Countess was profoundly isolated. The striking contrast between her captivating beauty and her brutal deeds made her an archetype for the alluring yet dangerous characters in vampire literature. She notably served as the inspiration for the female vampire in the 1872 classic Carmilla. The second figure is Baron Gilles de Rais, a 15th-century French nobleman and comrade-in-arms of Joan of Arc, the revered national hero and marshal during the 100 Years' War between England and France. After the war, however, the Baron descended into a dark obsession with black magic and alchemy. Holed up in shadowy chambers, he conducted sinister rituals, attempting to summon demons with blood and torturing over 300 children to death. Eventually, he was arrested by the religious courts on a litany of charges and executed. The Baron's brutal persona perfectly embodied the dark, bloodthirsty traits of the vampire. Some writers portrayed him as a tragic hero warped by the horrors of war, suggesting that the relentless violence numbed him to the value of life, driving him to seek extreme thrills through the abyss of dark magic, a figure both pitiable and chilling. The third is Vlad III, the Prince of Wallachia in Romania, infamous for his delight in impaling enemies through the anus with long spears. He used this gruesome method not only against foes but also to punish nobles and errant subjects in his domain. Known for intimidating neighboring states and adversaries, he earned the moniker Light of the River, likely a reference to his Romanian nickname, Teeps, meaning the Impaler. It's said he was responsible for over 100,000 deaths, even defeating and killing a formidable Ottoman ruler. Published in 1897, Dracula became the cornerstone of vampire culture, with its titular Count Dracula modeled after Vlad III. Bran Castle in Romania, tied to his legacy, became known as Dracula's residence and a symbol of vampirism. Much of the vampire imagery we recognize today owes a debt to Dracula. Take vampire bats, for instance. These creatures are native to South America and were unknown in Europe during the early days of vampire lore, meaning original tales had no connection to bats. It wasn't until the 16th to 18th centuries, when European colonizers brought tales of blood-sucking bats back from the Americas, that these nocturnal, mysterious animals captured public imagination. Bram Stoker cleverly wove vampire bats into Dracula, granting the Count the ability to transform into one and making bats an iconic emblem of his character. Romanticist writers, steeped in the Gothic tradition, propelled Western horror literature forward, gradually reshaping vampires from the ugly, lowly creatures of pre-18th century lore into noble, charismatic figures dripping with allure. This transformation allowed vampires to transcend cultural and geographical boundaries, gaining widespread appeal. For example, in The Vampire, considered the progenitor of vampire literature, Lord Ruthven is depicted as a captivating yet ruthless aristocrat, brimming with destructive allure. Looking at the history of vampire legends, it's clear they're more than just scary stories. They're a reflection of culture. The vampire's image has evolved with the times, mirroring humanity's complex understanding of death, fear, and desire. It embodies both darkness and a metaphor for human nature. Perhaps the enduring appeal of vampires lies in their duality. Neither wholly good nor evil, they straddle the line between light and shadow, prompting deep reflection on ourselves and the world around us. And that's a wrap for this episode of the video. I'm Dr. Red Panda. If any of you have your own perspectives, or if you think there are any errors in the video, feel free to leave a comment in the discussion section. If you found this video helpful, Don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Until next time, take care.